So Neil and Helen basically run the DairyBase project. Neil from his position as Farm Business Capability Manager and Helen from Farm Business Information. The other important person in the DairyBase team, who sits right here, is Fiona Smith. Can everyone see Fiona? So Fiona, when you put in a query around DairyBase to the 1800 number or into the DairyBase support email, it's 9 times out of 10 going to be Fiona who will actually try and fix it up. So what is DairyBase? So DairyBase is a total project, whereas the front part of DairyBase has all been about a tool that analyses dairy businesses. DairyBase itself is a whole project that aims at aligning the various parts of the industry, so the service provider sector, the consultants, the accountants, financial advisors and dairy farmers with a consistent way of doing things and some consistent terminology. And that hasn't always been the way things have been. So DairyBase aims to provide a national database of farm performance data, and at the moment what's loaded in every state now is all of the dairy farm monitor data from every state. Every dairy state is now in there, and I think QDAS has now got 14 or 12 or 13 years of historical data in there. So all of the QDAS data's in there, all of the Dairy Farm Monitor Victoria data's in there, and the rest is coming on stream. So in terms of that national database, it's there. It enables farmers and advisors to input, analyse and report farm business performance over time. So again, at the moment, within our business at Farmanco, I've been with Farmanco for 13 years, so I've got 13 and 14 years of data of clients' data, and all of that's in an Excel format. A lot of it's come out of taking stock, a little bit out of Red Sky, a little bit out of other programs as we've gone. And again, Dairy Australia is keen to get some of that, I'll call rigorous industry data sucked in to provide a bigger historical database. So I don't think I'm giving too much away. They are nearly finished mapping John Mulvaney's data set, and it'll be the first one sucked in. And they've gone with John because he's got 30 odd years of data going backwards. So next one will be some taking stock stuff and some Red Sky stuff. The other thing that the project aims to do is to standardise terminology and ensure consistency in calculations. So we've had different ways of calculating a profit measure with the different things that have come up over time. So when the taking stock tool came out a decade ago, taking stock had a way of working out EBIT working from operating surplus, and technically from the Bill Malcolms of the world, it wasn't technically correct. And so what DairyBase has done is to align that with a technically correct way of calculating it. And so by having that as a standard model, we've got the same definition, doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter who you are. What DairyBase is an annual comparison tool. It's not a monthly cash flow budget or something like that. So really it's about doing an analysis at the end of the year, and it's great for doing that. You can do some scenarios in there. I don't think it's the right tool to do that. By having some great annual data or some great historical stuff, what it allows us to do is to prepare some very rigorous forward-looking scenarios or budgets. So that's what I think is a real important thing by having some background data, some physical and some matching financial data. I'm happy for questions as we go. The value proposition for the dairy industry with the project is farm business analysis is more than crunching the numbers. So my understanding of the Red Sky process was there was a lot of number crunching and not necessarily a lot of interaction. I'm happy to be blown apart here. And as I said to the service providers this morning, for me, when I'm going out and doing business analysis, the last thing I want to do is just receive a profit and loss and balance sheet from a client. What I want to do is sit at the kitchen table and have a good discussion with you, Vic, about what's gone on in the last year so we can make some sense out of these numbers, and get a real feel for it. And it's that, what I call that richness of that interaction that actually makes that business analysis really, really worthwhile. And that means we need to connect with the people involved with the business. We need to look at the farm. We need to have some understanding of the prevailing conditions. So in northern Victoria this season, if you were on the south side of the border, you'd say we've had a pretty ordinary rainfall event. You go 10 kilometres into New South Wales and they've caught a fair bit of rain through the Riverina. So just we can be 30 kilometres difference in northern Victoria and Murray Dairies region this year, and the prevailing conditions have had a big impact. Somewhere we get down to the numbers or the facts, and I love the numbers, and then it's about the interaction between the members of the farm and their advisors to bring it all together and say, righto, we've got to picture a snapshot at the end of the year. What are our options of going forward? When things are going well, those options of going forward, the criticalness of that isn't as important as when you've got circumstances like what's happened in Victoria in the last month, with a significant drop in milk price at the end of the season. The other thing is DairyBase aims to provide the industry with some data at the individual farm level, at the regional level, and at the industry analysis level. And the reason it's there for industry analysis is it's able to be used to try and provide some information in relation to some debates. And that debate might be that all TMR farms are more profitable than a grass-only farm. They can pull out data from that that you've given permission to be identified, not identified to you personally, but as used for research work, and actually come up with some information on debates. One of the things that worries people with putting their financial information out into the ether is privacy. And so I just want to take us through some of the privacy and data security stuff that's involved around DairyBase. Firstly, to access DairyBase, you need to have a Dairy Australia user ID. So every dairy farm business in Australia has been allocated a user ID. A lot of them are still sitting there dormant. So at the moment, I think there's only 10% of farms in WA that have actually activated that ID. Once you've done that, you can actually, once you've registered and you're going, all data entry, all retrieval and reporting is actually done behind a secure DairyBase login. So only you can access your little spot in the ether. So everyone's personalised. Now, you can give that login the same as you can give your PIN number to your bank account to anyone you like. But within DairyBase, you can also authorise other people to see or use some of your files. And it can be individual files or it can be holus bolus. So as I said to the service providers today, there's no reason for anyone to give me their login code. They can just share whatever files they want to, or they can authorise me to access those files through my login, not their login. No private user data is made available through the DairyBase website, and DairyBase itself does not retain any personal information. So all of that information that goes in is actually kept separate from Dairy Australia by a group called Salesforce. So it's totally separate from DA. The DairyBase industry averages are derived at the moment from Dairy Farm Monitor project data only, and from, in the future, some service providers, and we talked about John Mulvaney's. The other thing that makes the privacy and data untraceable, is there was a risk, or people had said initially, well, if I refine my search for a comparison to a farm with 10,000 cows, how many 10,000 cow farms are there in Australia? I don't know, it might be one or it might be two. And you could pull that data out as a comparison. What DairyBase has been set up to say is that if you're trying to refine a comparison, it won't actually give you an industry average for that set. 2,000 cow farms feeding more than 3 tonnes of grain, it won't actually refine that down to an average comparison unless there's a minimum of 6 sets of data in there. So it means by trying to manipulate the data, you still can't identify any individual farm business. So that's trying to give some security and some assurance to you as users of that data.
So when the project finishes, presumably, we can sit down and enter data on our own. Mm-hmm. How is it going to be validated?
It's not.
So what's the implications of that?
So there's going to be a whole lot of data that's in there, and it's interesting talking to Helen last week before I was coming over here, and Helen saying in Victoria there's been a rush of people logging on for the first time, and looking in there, it appears, they don't know, but it looks as though not as though they're just doing a 14-15 analysis. There's a whole lot of activity going on in there, and what she thinks is happening is people are doing scenarios using DairyBase, and there is no validation of that. Now, in terms of data that gets put in, there is data that will be used at various levels. So we talked about data used for industry analysis or for use in debates. The only data that will be pulled out at that level is the National Dairy Farm Monitor stuff, the stuff with the highest level of credibility.
So is that ongoing?
So that's ongoing.
Oh, okay.
So at the moment, it's envisaged that Dairy Farm Monitor or similar will keep going into the future. So that's what DA is calling their high-level data. The next level of data is saying stuff that a farm consultant or an accountant has sat down and put in with the farmer, and that's saying we're not calling that research level data, but it's the next level data. And then there's a whole lot of other data that might be important to me as a consultant, but they'd call that not junk data, but the next level down. And when you start entering data, you get two options. You can call that data actual data or scenario data. If I go and put some actual data in there, DA into the future will say we've got a high level of confidence with that. If I put in any scenario data, automatically it's kicked out of being used for any project work. It's just saying it's not validated. We don't have confidence in it. We don't know where it's come from, basically. So when you get logging on for your own time, you can, when you create a data set, you can define how you want it to be used. You can let it be used for industry comparison, or you can make it used just for your own use. You've got that level of interaction as well.
Just the other point on that too, the DFMP at the moment, you're really goes in through the Excel spreadsheet systems. In the future, the intention is to come onto DairyBase. So depending on whether the project continues to be funded and how it's funded, it will actually be DairyBase as the driver of the data input.
So my understanding, we've got one more year where it will be used on the Excel, and then after that, DairyBase will be the input tool.
And then that validation will still take place for the DFMP project.
So the place to go, everyone, buried in your head, dairybase.com.au. And Kirk says, don't forget the .au, otherwise you'll be kicked into New Zealand's DairyBase. I'm going to quickly go through some of the input pages about DairyBase. First one is, Kirk showed us the profit map that's coming out of the Dairy Farm Monitor stuff, and surprise, surprise, the profit map that's been used by Dairy Farm Monitor project, or being used by DairyBase, is exactly the same as the Dairy Farm Monitor project. There's a cash side of looking at how the business is performing, and there's a profit side. Who's going to explain to me what EBIT is? I need one answer from EBIT from what you heard this morning or earlier from Kirk, and I'm going to go no further. Otherwise you're going to hear me drone on again. I'll take it from anyone. What's EBIT? Yes, and how do we calculate it?
We calculate it with the income and the minus the operating costs.
Yep. The cash ones. We make a couple of other adjustments. Imputed labour and depreciation. And there's two more changes that we do compared to the cash.
Livestock inventory changes and feed.
Yep. So when we look at the cash side of things, we look at livestock income, which is just sales minus purchases. When we look at our profit, we actually look at our livestock trading account. So if we've built up an extra 100 animals and they have added value to our business, that's getting added into our profit. That doesn't get picked up on the cash side. And similarly, if we've spent I can't remember the number this morning that I used, John, but if we spent $450,000, such as one of my Fonterra clients did, putting away maize silage this harvest, ready for next year, which we thought was a great thing prior to the price drop, from his cash side of his business, it's bumped up our feed costs horrendously. But from a profit, we've got nearly $500,000 worth of additional fodder inventory there for next year. So it's just there making sure we're getting alignment. As we move down, our two numbers was what used to be my favourite number in the whole world, operating surplus. So when as a consultant, I said the most important number in the world was the operating cash surplus. You've run the business and cash operating surplus is what you've got left to spend on yourself, to pay the bank, either finance or principal, and do capital improvements. I used to just call it operating surplus. Today I'm a bit more leaning towards or including EBIT. And then we need to look a bit deeper and says there's still some more costs to come out there. From a cash side, our operating cash surplus, we've got to pay our finance costs and our drawings, and then potentially any principal and capital. And somewhere at the end of the day, we're left with total cash income less total cash costs. And hopefully that should equate to movement on the overdraft. So who's blowing the overdraft out this year? So often when I go out to a farm, this is the measure of how well the business has gone, whereas this needs to be the measure of how well the business has gone. I've spent $50,000 more than I've earned. Have I had a good year or not? I've spent $50,000 more than I've earned, but I've got a profit of $400,000. It tells the whole story. Cash flow's been tight because I've spent more than I've earned, but I've still run a very profitable business. I've then elected to pay the bank, and I've possibly elected to do some capital works or something else. So there's something for everyone in DairyBase. So we put in some numbers about the area that we own, the area that we lease, total usable area, what's unusable, how much of it's milking area, how much of its support area, and how much of the support area is irrigated, and the program calculates that we're dry land. For our back calculation for pasture harvest, it asks us what sort of terrain and how far on average do the cows walk, because that's got an impact on the energy use by the stock. The second most favourite screen on the whole thing is livestock. And like John talked about before, when we're doing our livestock, it's trying to do two things in one. One is to come up with our livestock trading account, which is how many animals did we start with, how many did we finish with, and what was our average number. And it also is asking some questions about where did they graze. Because we're trying to say how much of the grass that they ate on average came off the home area or the milking area, how much came off the support area, and how much came from adjustment. And to get the numbers right, we need to be fairly anally retentive and go step by step by step by step. We can all do it. It's about a matter of rigour. So I've done some training with a couple of discussion groups in Northern Victoria 10 months ago, and we just stepped it past. And I'm just saying it's just a level of rigour, step by step by step by step, and you can get it. Milk production, you can put milk production in month by month, and that's a requirement for the Dairy Farm Monitor. I generally just put in annual production. And as we put data in, you'll see these blue screens up the top. We get extra bits come up. So as we populate an area, we get, if I go back one, how many litres per cow, kilos of milk solids, cows per milking area. We've got some data coming up and telling us how we're going as we're entering. We never get the whole picture until the end, but we get bits and pieces coming up along the way. The feed is the most exciting part of the whole program. And it's where having some input sheets, keeping our mind fresh, is important. Opening stock and closing stock. How much we purchased, what the purchase price was, how much of that was fed on the milking area, how much was fed on the support area. We've got to get all of those right to get everything together. The program pulls in some default dry matter, wastages and energy content for each of the feeds that we put in. and we can change those if we've got our own feed results, feed test results. There's some inputs there for fertiliser. There's some inputs there for rainfall and irrigation. There's some questions about labour and management, and so it's there asking about paid employees, how many full-time equivalent paid employees, and how many unpaid family members are involved in the business. And from the full-time equivalents that we put in for unpaid family, it's where we get an imputed labour calculation being done. We then get into the financial side. We put in some income and we put in some costs. So we put in our herd costs straight off our, straight off our profit and loss, which is now aligned with the DairyBase chart of accounts. So everyone's going to go home and align their current chart of accounts on Quicken, QuickBooks, MyOb, Maestro, Xero, AgriMaster with what's in here. And we can pull that out and fill out our herd costs pretty quickly. We can fill out our shed costs pretty quickly. We can fill out our feed costs, and there's some breakdowns there. Whose accountant has a marvellous heading called feed and fodder costs? And it's worth about $1.1 million or whatever the figure is. And then we've got stamps and stationery, $55 for the year. So we've got this big bundling of the biggest cost centre. We try and break that feed costs up as much as possible in DairyBase. We've got our overhead costs. So we've got our cash overhead costs that we get from our profit and loss, and then we've got our non-cash overheads. So the imputed labour is coming from what we've put in on the labour page, and our depreciation, our default in DairyBase is that 10% again. You can ratchet that up or down, and you can also change it from being a percentage to actually being a dollar figure. So if you say, well, the depreciation's $195,000 on that new rotary dairy this year, we can put it in. We've got some finance costs. Has anyone here got no finance costs and want to own up? I don't have a client with no finance costs. So our finance costs, and then we've got some capital costs, some drawings, I missed there, some drawings and some principal payments as well. And then we've got our liabilities. There's a fair bit of work involved when you're crunching the numbers in terms of putting together our 10 equipment loans and our 5 long-term loans into one number. So I find that challenging when I've got clients with 30 different sorts of financing occurring, trying to bundle that all together, and we're trying to put it all into just 3 pages. So that's the input screens for DairyBase.